yellow and red. Plus, it means that we're getting closer to my favorite holiday, and that's Christmas. Today, we're going to be talking about King David and patience. But before we do anything, let's stand to our feet and follow along to this worship song.
Woke up this morning feeling kinda blue, a little sad, but I know just what to do. Whoa, oh, oh, whoa, oh, oh. I have learned that I can go to Jesus. He lifts me up whenever I need it. Whoa, oh, oh, whoa, oh, oh. When I'm worried, when I'm feeling down, that's when God comes through, turns it all around. Yeah, He gives me joy in every situation, keeps my spirits high, no matter what I'm facing. Oh, 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 oh. I'm feeling better, God made all the difference. He's always here to listen. Oh, 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 oh. He is my source, the one who gives me life. He is my God and He's good all the time. Oh, 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 oh. When I'm worried, when I'm feeling down, that's when God comes through, turns it all around. Yeah, He gives me joy in every situation, keeps my spirits high, no matter what I'm facing. Oh, 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 oh. When I'm worried, when I'm feeling down, that's when God comes through and turns it all around. Yeah, He gives me joy in every situation, keeps my spirits high, no matter.
Patience is waiting with a happy heart. In our story, we are going to be talking about King David. But before he was a king and before he battled against Goliath, we are going to be talking about when he was a shepherd boy and was selected by the prophet Samuel as the next king. But he wasn't ready. Let's watch a short video.
God's story, David and Saul. So part of God's story is about two guys named David and Saul, and it begins like this. You may have heard of David before, the little shepherd boy who stood up to the massive warrior Goliath and won. But that isn't the whole story. In fact, that's really only a part of it. The rest of the story starts with a man named Saul. See, God wasn't very happy with Saul, Israel's first king. The people of Israel had begged God's prophet Samuel to give them a king so they could be more like other nations. God warned the Israelites they would regret it, but gave them Saul as their king. And like anyone, King Saul wasn't perfect and soon started to mess up, disobeying God and leading Israel away from Him. And that's where our friend David comes in. God wanted a new king to replace Saul, so He sent Samuel to a man named Jesse. Jesse showed Samuel his eldest sons, big and strong men. Samuel thought for sure that one of these impressive boys was to be king, but God had other plans. God told Samuel to find another son, so Jesse brought in little David. Even though David was a little scrawny and had the smelly job of taking care of sheep, God told Samuel to look at more than his appearance. Samuel obeyed and anointed David, God's special way of choosing people. When David was anointed, the good spirit that had been helping Saul rule left him and was replaced with a new spirit that wouldn't leave him alone. Imagine there was a bee buzzing around in your brain that you couldn't do a thing about. That may be what it was like for Saul. Since Saul was going a little crazy, his servants had David, a great harp player, come to the palace and play music to calm the king. Now, One day, David came to bring his brothers, who were working as soldiers, some lunch. What started out as a lunch delivery soon turned into one of the most famous stories in the Bible, where tiny David took down the massive warrior Goliath with a single stone. After this, David was like a famous rock star. In fact, David was so popular that Saul worried people would start thinking David should be king instead. Saul began to try and kill him, sending him on dangerous quests where any normal guy would have died, and even threw a spear at his head once. Eventually, things got so bad that Jonathan, Saul's son, who David had become great friends with, helped David escape. David wandered for years trying to stay out of Saul's grasp. Twice, Saul even got so close that David had the opportunity to kill him. But David refused to kill the king in charge. David continued to flee from Saul for years, and without God's blessing, Saul's army was losing to the Philistines. Soon enough, Saul's army had been defeated. Jonathan had died, and the Philistines were now chasing them. Saul was so afraid of capture that he chose to fall on his own sword instead of letting the Philistines catch him. When David heard of Jonathan and Saul's death, he went out and avenged them. And with Saul dead, David returned to Israel and at last took his place as God's new king. And that's the story of David and Saul. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. God made Saul king. Saul disobeyed God. God said he would take the kingdom away from Saul and chose David. David became popular. Saul became fearful of David. David had to run away. David wandered for years. Saul died. David avenged Saul. David took over as Israel's chosen king. And that's a part of God's story.
What a great story. What did God tell the prophet Samuel? That David will lead the people of Israel. Even though God chose David to be king as a young boy, how old was David before he actually started ruling Israel? And that's 30. How did David show patience in this story? By waiting with a happy heart and good attitude. He served others while he waited. He obeyed God while he waited. Even though David had to wait years to step into the role as king, he trusted God's timing and waited with a happy heart. When we face times when we have to wait, we can ask God to grow patience in us so we can wait with a happy heart too. We're memorizing a verse that helps us remember about the fruit of the Spirit. As we learn more about each fruit of the Spirit, we'll add one more part to the verse each week. Let's add another word and practice it together. But the Holy Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience. Galatians 5:22-23. Before we end today, I have a couple of questions for you to think about and answer. First, what are some situations you have faced when it was difficult to have patience? Second, how does God show us patience? I hope all of you have a great week, and we will see you all next time. God bless you.